Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Carl, and welcome to Politics in Perspective. We're deep into the Christmas season, the holiday season. I hope everyone is enjoying it, and I wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah. This week's show, we're going to debunk affordability with Trump economist Tomas Philipson, former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. Before that, and in my opening statement, the Democrats just not giving up on socialism at all, coast to coast. We're going to talk about Gavin Newsom's latest socialist comment, and we're going to wound up, whichever you prefer, with a political roundup talking about the Miami election and the Georgia election and why that may be the most telling of all of these recent elections, why the Democrats are happy, why Republicans should be thinking about what's going on. So let's get to, well, before we do that, I want to say thanks, of course, to Ex America News, to worldviewtube.com and AUN TV. And I especially want to welcome buzzscv.com. That's buzzscv.com for picking us up in Southern California. So a shout out to all of you. Thanks so much for covering the show. Let's get to our opening statement. Socialism from coast to coast. You see the screen there? You see the Democrats whose faces you recognize now, starting out with the senior Bernie Sanders. Below him is his companion, at least his touring companion, that's AOC. You know, she raises a ton of money and has somehow made a lot of money, like Ilhan Omar. They were joined this year in a big way by Mondani. We'll see what he does in New York. Certainly, he's showing up that he's not going to do the removal of encampments, his appointments. He looks very socialist. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about Gavin Newsom and his socialist turn. Now, Gavin Newsom is famous for horrible policies and then taking credit for how well California is otherwise doing. He did it again this week where he said, we're leading in all of these economic categories. What Gavin does consistently is take credit for what the private sector does. And the private sector is able to achieve all of this because they were in spite of all of Gavin Newsom's policies. When you look at someone in office, the question becomes, are they helping with jobs or are they making it harder to get jobs? Well, California is number one in the country in unemployment and number one in poverty. So you tell me, is Gavin Newsom's helping or not? Number one in regulations, number one in taxes. Gavin helping or not? But what he does is he takes credit for what the private sector accomplishes. But now that he's running for president, he's just talking in just off the top of his head. It constantly comes out. And then he says something like this. So let's bring this up, what he said this particular week. And this is near and dear to me because I cover this topic extensively in the book you should be buying for Christmas presents, which is The Lessons of the American Civilization. Newsom says if we don't democratize our economy and allow for the distribution of wealth, our democracy will die. Excuse me. If we don't democratize our economy and allow for the distribution of wealth, our democracy will die. So, of course, this demonstrates the ultimate in ignorance that is the socialist or the modern day Democrat. Because what Gavin is saying there is, in his mind, the economy, like Bernie Sanders says, the economy is only working for the rich and it's not working for the rest of America. Now, of course, what's interesting about that is Bernie Sanders sells books, makes millions of dollars, has 3 homes. So it's working for him. Uh, Elizabeth Warren, it works for her. She's worth millions. AOC's worth millions. Works for her. Mandami lives lived with his parents. They did super well off of America, even though they decry America. Ilhan Omar is supposedly worth $30 million. I've never seen exactly how she got $30 million, but it's certainly working for them. So all of these demagogues telling you that it's not working for Americans, they somehow gained the system. This past week, we saw Gene Simmons on Capitol Hill say he succeeded because America gave him opportunity and his hard work resulted in his success. And he said he wants that to be the storyline, not that government did something. So if we can bring up Newsom's comment once again and we can break it down, what is he saying? If we don't democratize our economy and allow for the distribution of wealth, well, his problem is that government, never in history has government done that. In fact, the only times in history, and this is really the crux of the matter, and the decision the United States is going to make, is it going to follow somebody like him who's probably never read a history book in his life? Or is it going to go the way of the founders? Because the reason why America succeeded was the relative absence of government interference. At our founding, we had the 13 colonies. There was no strong centralized government, either in Washington, of course, which Washington, D.C. didn't exist at the time of the founding. The capital was in New York City, and that's where Washington was sworn in. There was no big centralized government. There were the 13 colonies. There was no one colony that controlled everyone else. There were larger successful colonies like Virginia, like New York, like Pennsylvania, but they didn't weigh down Delaware or Georgia or tell them how to live at all. And as Adam Smith talked about, and I put this in my book, the economic power was spread out among the colonies. You don't find in history that a economy becomes undemocratic, if you can use that word, until government comes in and starts making choices. That's where we are today. If you look at every crisis in American history, whether it's the New Deal, banking crisis, we've had many of them, the advent of the Fed, COVID, the economy becomes undemocratic. And by that, I mean, isn't spread out throughout the country. When government grows large enough to award regulations in favor of certain industries or businesses, or actually just gives them money, that's when the economy becomes undemocratic. Because when it does that, the little guy, the small businessman, and by the way, small business is where job growth is. If you look at big business, the relative number of employees they have has been rather static over the decades. Job growth occurs in the small business sector. But when the big guy goes to Washington, D.C., whether that's Verizon or AT&T or Big Pharma or Big Food, and they do business with the federal government, and when the regulations come down, they have influence over that. Then the economy becomes directed out of Washington instead of directed out of anywhere in the United States. Again, what made the United States so successful in the beginning was the fact that Virginia had almost no influence on Georgia. Even New York, New York City, what would become of New York City, did not have political power over Georgia. Where we are today is that big government makes big deals with big food, big pharma, and in this whole affordability when it comes to health insurance with big insurance companies. The Democrat bill was a great deal for the insurance companies. Their profits and revenues have skyrocketed. Your premiums have skyrocketed too. Because when government subsidizes an industry, that industry raises prices. It's always been true. So Gavin Newsom wants to get into government at a higher level, the presidency, so he can start directing winners and losers. He'll decide what industries succeed and what don't. And in the process, we always lose. So governments don't democratize. The absence of government is what democratizes. Then the playing field becomes level. I compete against another lawyer based on my ability. The restaurant down the street competes based on its abilities, as opposed to gaining government subsidies or not. I mean, think about the COVID shutdown. Big businesses stayed open, smaller businesses were shut. That's not democratization. That's the destruction of it. History is littered with economies that screech to a halt, like all of Europe, because the economy is democratized by government, which actually just fails at the process. So don't listen to Gavin Newsom. He's probably never read a history book in his life, never read an economics book, and he's going to harm America. No way he should be president. And that's my opening statement. Thank you for watching this episode. We're going to come back with Trump economist, Tomas, and he's going to talk to you about the true nature of the affordability crisis, its sources, and what we should do about it. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. I'm Tom Del Beccaro. Hope you enjoyed that first opening statement. And now we have our difference maker interview. And everybody's talking about affordability, and it's a real issue. But there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I thought we'd go to someone who probably gets it better than just about anybody in the country, certainly economics, and that is Tomas Philipson. You're going to remember him because he was the chairman of in the Trump administration. He was, of course, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, and currently he's at the University of Chicago, professor of public policy studies emeritus in the School of Public Policy. Tomas, how are you? Thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Let's start off with people who may not immediately recognize you. How did you come to economics? And you're at my favorite economic school on earth, the University of Chicago. Why don't you tell people just a little bit about you?
Yeah, I came to economics from mathematics because I had a roommate when I came to California from Sweden. I was born and raised in socialism Sweden and came here for grad school. I had a roommate who studied economics, and that was much more interesting than my math book. So I started taking a class at economics, and ever since I've been, devoted to a career as a research economist, essentially.
All right. And how about the Trump administration? How did you find your way there?
Well, Kevin Hassett, who was the initial chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, he and I went to grad school together. We kept in touch throughout the years, essentially. And he said he was the first person he recruited to the council once he got the job. And he and I were together there for 2 years. And then I took over after he left as chairman. Now he's looking to be the next Fed chairman, which is even more striking.
Yes, it is. Okay, so you came from socialism. You must have a warning for Americans, perhaps, that you could give them now.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's so taken for granted in Sweden, where we had at the time, 60% of GDP was public spending, or something, compared to U.S., which is about 20. But it turns out that Sweden has changed course much more so than socialists in America want to give them credit to, like Bernie Sanders and others want to point to Sweden or Scandinavia as the role model, even though that role model is turning away from socialism and understanding the problems with it.
Yes, isn't it so that the level of public spending has come down dramatically below 50%, and they've also removed things like minimum wage and the like. Is that not true?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff that used to be completely publicly produced, such as education and healthcare, are now privately produced, even though it might be publicly financed, essentially. So a lot of things that is happening in the Scandinavian countries is in the opposite direction of what's happening in the U.S.
All right. Well, I mentioned the affordability issue. Before we exactly get to that, I want to talk to you about inflation and the cause of inflation. I grew up learning from Milton Friedman in his free to choose exercises and learning about monetary policy. CPI is not the same as inflation, at least in my mind. So we want to get to the what causes inflation. I have this first slide for you to look at. There we have the history of American spending and the history of American debt. So what in your mind, or at least what do you believe is caused the Biden inflation and some of the bigger bouts of inflation we've had in the past?
Yeah, for your listeners, the first thing you want to recognize is the difference between inflation and just relative prices changing in the economy. And this is something, if your readers understand it, they will do better than the Fed economists, who particularly have trouble understanding that. Inflation has to do with economy-wide prices going up. That means pretty much everyone, is spending more dollars on pretty much everything. And so it's the average price in the economy. And that is a government induced disease. When we have inflation, it's either caused by a higher money supply or higher levels of fiscal spending, as you alluded to here. For the money supply, it's a very easy way to understand it, which is, if you increase the supply of anything, you will decrease its value. And when we decrease the value of the dollar, that's called inflation. You have more dollars that are needed to buy a certain amount of goods. So you can't have inflation unless you have the government doing something to stimulate it. The reason I said the Fed economists don't understand this, because they think taxes on particular industries, as opposed to subsidies through fiscal policy, have inflationary impacts, such as taxes in terms of tariffs, which they said would be inflationary. Taxes on particular industries will change relative prices in the economy. It will not change the overall price level, economy-wide price level, where everyone is spending more dollars on everything. So, in particular, it might increase the price of a tariff good. Certainly, that might happen if it gets pushed on to consumers. But if people have the same income, they have to spend less on other things if they spend more on a particular tax good. So that will decrease the demand for other goods, and therefore decrease prices on non-tariff goods in the economy. So it's important that people understand that you can't have the private sector generating an inflation. It's all due to the public sector.
Well, you brought up the Fed, and of course, that's in the news. Kevin Hassett may become the next Fed chair. There's Kevin Warsh, there's some others. Why does this Fed, and when I had a conversation with Kevin Warsh, and I asked him about why does the Fed have this view that if the economy is doing well and you're increasing the supply of goods, somehow a good economy leads to inflation, and they feel a need to cut off the economy. They're still stuck in this Phillips curve world. Is it rampant in the Fed right now? Do you agree with that? And what's the solution?
No, I think there's actually very scant evidence for the Phillips curve, which is for your listeners the fact that there's a trade-off with unemployment and inflation. Once you increase employment, you will have more inflation, etc. That's due to that they have this view of the world that the government is only changing demand in the economy, and once you shift demand for a given amount of supply, you will always have output and price go in the same direction. That's how a supply curve looks like. So if you shift demand around, both output and prices are going up or down at the same time, essentially. That's the world they live in. There's a lot of evidence against that world. So if you look at cross country correlation between unemployment and inflation, it's very, very weak, if not non existent. A lot of economists argue, but it is the world they live in, and it's the world that DC lives in, essentially, and has lived in for the last 40, 50 years, essentially, even though the evidence is pretty scant for it.
So talk about Kevin Hassett and why you think he would be a good Fed chair.
Well, I think the way I view it is a lot of people like me are frustrated with the Fed because it's so non-transparent. They come out with decisions which is very, very difficult to understand how they arrived at that decision. That's not unique to the Fed. It's true about a lot of government agencies who do not reveal their analysis of why they come up with decisions. They just reveal the results of that analysis. CBO is the same way. They will spit out a bunch of budget projections from legislative proposals without telling you how they got those, essentially. And it's the same with the Fed. So I think Kevin is the unique candidate in the bunch that are left, which are very, very few. It's Warsh and maybe one other, that has the ability to, one, understand the economic research that the Fed does, and two, communicate that more transparently to an outside audience in an effective manner. Kevin is very TV savvy and also very good at communicating complicated ideas simply. So he will be a better communicator than anyone in the bunch, I think, to Congress, but also to the public, taxpayers who are funding the Fed, essentially, on why they're doing what they're doing. At the same time, is he understanding what that underlying analysis entails.
So back to the cause of inflation. During the recent shutdown, the Democrats wanted $1.5 trillion more spending. Would that not have led to more inflation?
No, absolutely. Even Democrats said it would. I mean, Larry Summers was one of the first to say it would, essentially. I think that, we basically had it during COVID, we had sort of money drop from the sky into the households of people so everyone could spend more on everything. And that's why you got inflation. In addition, the borrowing that took place was monetized by the Fed. And so they basically purchased, they lent all the money to the government that was borrowing at the time. So it was a huge increase in the money supply that took place of 25 to 30%, I believe. So it shouldn't be that surprising. And it was not unique to the US, obviously. Most rich countries had the same policy of massive borrowing and massive spending during COVID to compensate for what I view as a faulty shutdown of the young population in the economy, to basically who were at no risk for or not right, very limited risk for the disease, to steer it off from the retired part of the community who was not in the economy, which was the high risk older individual.
So if we look at this slide on prices, and I realize that it's politics and they want to blame somebody. Joe Kernan of CNBC said the affordability issue is from the 22% increase in prices under Biden. Full stop. You've seen the charts that show that inflation at the end of the Trump term was very low, and then it jumped up during Biden with the ill-named Inflation Reduction Act. So please, do we have an affordability crisis, and what is the cause in your mind?
So affordability has to do not with prices alone, but with the relationship between prices and your paycheck, right? So movie theaters used to cost 25 cents back in our grandparents' days, but it was less affordable then than it is today. What does that mean? That means you had to work longer hours to earn a movie ticket to be able to go to the movie theater. That is to say, your paycheck was less relative to the movie price compared to now, essentially. So it has to do with what economists call real income or real wages, which has to do with how much do you earn after inflation is taken out. And if you look at the real income experience in the first Trump administration, workers gained about $6,000 in real income. In the Biden, they lost $3,000 in real income because wages grew less than prices. And in the first year of the Trump administration's second term, we've gained about a thousand, 1,500 roughly dollars in real income. So if you take a 4-year term and multiply by the first year's performance, you get $6,000 in gain, which is exactly the number which was the gain in the first Trump administration and during the 4-year term, essentially. So there's no question that real incomes have done better during Trump than Biden. That is to say, you still have people feeling the pain, and people feel the pain. You should not question that people are experts on their own pain. They certainly know what they're experiencing with their budgets and with the prices they're facing. I'm less convinced that they're experts on the cause of that pain, whether it's due to Biden policies or Trump policies. They seem to be blaming Trump. And the way I view it is essentially that the Trump administration got a sick patient and they're the hospital, essentially, and now you're blaming the hospital for the patient being sick. And that's not the cause of the sickness. The cause of the sickness was under the previous administration that made things a lot more unaffordable in a real income sense. That is to say, paychecks compared to prices.
Okay, so then what's your assessment of the economy today? Is it in this transition from the sugar high of government spending to privatization, as Scott Bessent likes to talk about? And how long will we have to wait to see the real benefits of that?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at the economy today, right, it's on the traditional measures we look at as economists as aggregate measures, and that might mask differences within the population, obviously. But if you look at aggregate measures, in terms of GDP growth, we had a 4% growth last quarter. We're predicted to have the same next quarter. Uh, Inflation is, it's not 2% like the Fed wants it, but it's not particularly high as well. It's coming down to 2%. Unemployment is very low. Retail spending is very robust, essentially. So it is a little bit of a puzzle when you have all those standard metrics of what's going on in the aggregate metrics on what's going on, that there's such bad sentiment about the economy from such sentiment correctly, was present in the financial crisis or something like that. But then you had real issues. You had unemployment spiking, etc. Now, today, we don't have that, but we still have a very strong disapproval by consumers in the economy, and that has to be taken seriously. But it's puzzling given the aggregate data we have.
Well, so let's talk a little politics because you have to manage people's expectations. Trump talked about bringing prices down. Yeah, oil and gas prices you can seem to affect. Egg prices, as you mentioned, supply and demand and supply chains can have an effect on individual items. Did Trump sort of oversell his ability to bring this down? People talk on the left, oh, well, you need a recession to kill off the demand and then prices come down. Or are we in this phase where it's going to take some time where prices remain relatively stable, wages jump up, but will that be in time for the midterm elections?
I mean, if you look at inflation, certainly inflation has come down with the second term of the Trump administration. Price levels never come down, right? I mean, it's very rare that we have decreased prices, deflation in the overall economy in the U.S. at least. So if you look at the growth of prices, we slow the growth of prices certainly compared to the Biden administration. Have we stopped the growth? Have we slowed the growth of prices enough? Apparently not, according to consumers. So that's a real concern, I think. But it has brought down energy prices. There's a lot of food prices that have come down. If you look at the price that increased the most during the Biden administration, and this is typical for sort of Keynesian policy, is that the price of credit was by far the largest inflationary item in the economy. If you look at mortgage rates going from 3.5% to 7%, that's a doubling of a mortgage check every month. That's 100% increase in the price of credit. That's far outweighs any good price increases. So what the Fed does is essentially it fights goods inflation, that is to say the CPI type of numbers, with credit inflation, that is to say it raises interest rates. And that's why households are hit so hard, because a lot of big ticket items are purchased on credit, namely housing, cars, and a lot of other things that are very, very expensive. So, you know, that's another price that people don't talk about, that is extremely important, that is coming down. We had a rate cut today again, essentially, or yesterday, and that is now slowly coming down. It's not obviously down to pre-Biden levels when it was hiked up again, but it's the most important price to come down.
Well, you mentioned the Fed, and Sen, you'd be alluding at what Besson talks about Wall Street versus Main Street, where the Fed seems to be a good deal for Wall Street. But if you're not in Wall Street and you're living on Main Street, there's that problem. So back towards the end of 2017, when I was helping Steve Moore on communications with the Trump bill, I said when a bill like this, the size of it, it takes about 6 months to take full effect. And I said in the second quarter of 18, you would get significant growth. I said over 3.5% and wound up going over that. The Republicans waited to July to put this bill, to put their big, beautiful bill in. So we're in this delay period in my mind. Do you agree with that sort of assessment? And when do you think the Trump economy, with all the changes, the dereg, the gas prices, the tax bill, when do you think that'll take full effect in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, the July 25 is actually quicker than we did it back in 2017 when it passed in December, the first year of the Trump administration, essentially back then. So it's half a year earlier than when we did it. So hopefully, my sense is that this 26 is going to look very, very good. I think we're going to have a lot of positive forces that are taking place now. It's not only the dereg and the tax cut, it's this enormous increase in foreign direct investments that are coming into the U.S. We usually have about $200 or $300 coming in as foreign direct investments. With these trade deals, if they're enforced and actually executed as agreed, that's in the trillions now coming in essentially. And hopefully that investment will pay off in 2026, certainly in 27 and 28, if those investment comes in on the timeline agreed. But that's an enormous stimulus as well.
So are you looking in 2026 for economic growth for the year? What would be your estimate?
I mean, I think we're already at 4% 2 quarters in a row, which is very, very promising. I would hope that we at least make that in 2026 going forward. That would be fantastic. I think in some sense, there's going to be a surprise for people also in terms of the tax refunds they're getting. I think a lot of people have not anticipated that. So that would be an additional boost where people keep their money. And that's the best way to cure affordability, is to have not the government take your money and often waste it essentially.
Often in my interviews, I'm asked about uh, the uh, politics today, given the economic condition versus what it will be like next year. And I said, look, there's this transition period, and we can expect consumer sentiment to rise along with their paychecks versus the cost of goods in 2026. Is that what you're expecting as well?
Yeah, no, I would expect that absolutely. I think there's a 2026 is set up. I mean, given that we already have 4% growth, I think 2026 is set up to be a great year. And that will translate into real gains, continued real gains for consumers, and hopefully that will hit home enough for people to lose the sour sentiment they have of the economy right now, which I think is a puzzle, and I think a lot of people don't understand it. I would say both on the left and the right. Obviously, the left is joyful that everyone is feeling miserable, which is kind of sad. Uh, but I think even on the right hand, on the Republican side, people see these common statistic like I discussed about the economy, but yet people are not feeling happy, and that's a little puzzling.
Okay, as we wind up this interview, what wisdom can you give the younger generation about socialism? And the EU has had what, essentially 0.1% growth for the last 20, 30 years, right? Very little growth. Spain had unemployment in 2013 among youth in the above 50%. What wisdom can you give the younger generation who's told that it's fair and people need to be equal? But does innovation occur in Europe versus America? What wisdom can you give them?
Well, I think the real issue is that many people on among democratic socialists or otherwise, or the professors in the universities who are teaching this stuff, is that they feel that fundamental problem they feel is that rich people don't help the rest of the people in the economy enough. And that's a complete misunderstanding of how an economy works. The only way you get rich in an economy is by helping other people. That is to say, you sell something that they value more than they're paying you for it, essentially. And if you look at the economic estimates of how much producers get of the value they create for consumers, it's about 5% on average. So whenever you are out there becoming a billionaire, that means you generated, 95 billion in value for consumers essentially. So you help a lot of other people by becoming rich. So that's the misunderstanding which the socialists don't get, that we are basically should be applauding all the billionaires because once they become billionaires, that means they generated far more in value for the rest of us essentially. And their fair share, they're generating, but there's blood, sweat, and tears. 95% of it goes to other people. That is to say, consumers. So that's a pretty fair share of your effort going to others, in my book.
Okay, one last question. Before the automobile came around, people had no ability to think that it would someday, that industry would be some 20% of the economy. The same could have said in the before computers, right? Now we're talking AI. Will AI follow a similar model, creating industries and rich people that we didn't imagine? Or will it be as disruptive as a lot of the Malthusians seem to think on the left?
No, I mean I think it's a big misunderstanding. Let's take agriculture. Agriculture used to be our entire economy. Agricultural economies existed before we had industrialization. So most of our GDP, let's say 95% of our GDP, was in agriculture. Then there was an enormous productivity gain in agriculture, so that today 2% of our population produces enough calories and food to make us obese, as opposed to everyone producing food in the past and we were starving. So that's an enormous productivity gain in agriculture. That opened up people to do that. Didn't destroy life for all the people who didn't work in agriculture. In fact, it increased the value or the quality of life because now all this attention could be made, could be put to other things than producing food for ourselves, essentially. It's the same with AI, essentially. There's going to be some disruption. It's actually quicker disruption probably than for agriculture. Same thing could be said with manufacturing. Manufacturing used to be a much larger share of the economy. Now it's like down to 15% or whatever it is. Services has taken over manufacturing as driving our economy. And it didn't hurt people, it helped people, essentially. And it's the same with AI. It's going to be a quicker change with AI, potentially, but it's going to be enormously productivity enhancing. It's going to therefore increase wages and because you typically get paid more the more productive you are. But also, it's going to have people do other the mundane things they did with creating spreadsheet or whatever it was that AI is now going to do for them. It's going to be devoted. That time is going to be devoted for other things. That's going to make us even more happy than we were doing all the mundane stuff that AI is going to be doing for us. So I'm very, very optimistic. It's a great thing coming, and I can't wait to see what happens.
Okay, on that same note, before I let you go, let's go back to where we were, affordability. I've always believed that we haven't been able to measure the productivity, all of the productivity gains of the computer age. We underestimate that, and that keeps inflation down. Is that something you agree with, or what's your thoughts on that?
I think this you got to separate from lower cost of producing something, therefore gets translated into lower prices through competition, usually, essentially. But that's true in any industry, right? That the real cost of producing something goes down over time, unless it's just pure labor or service. But goods producing industries, the reason manufacturing is such a small share of GDP now is because we've gotten so good at it that it's cheaper and cheaper to make these goods, and therefore prices for them are coming down, essentially. So that increase of innovation that drives down costs are essentially lowering, the cost of production and therefore prices in every industry. That's different from inflation. Inflation, like I said, is an increase in monetary or fiscal policy. So you can have this type of innovation reducing resource costs in an economy, but still have inflation because you have a huge increase in money supply, like you did during COVID, right? People didn't stop innovating during COVID to make things cheaper. It was just that the money supply effect dominated the reduction in resources it took to make certain goods. So I agree. Computers have greatly increased our productivity, which is the same thing as saying lower production costs. Essentially, I don't know how well it's measured or not into prices, but that's a different effect on prices than what inflation is.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was unclear with that. I just think we haven't to capture the productivity gains that we have from the computer industry. But we've run out of time. Tomas, thanks for the professor in you. It drives me crazy that people don't know more, but then again, I understand that. And I appreciate your approach to this. So thanks so much for visiting us today. And maybe we'll have you back in like 6, 7 months when this economy's humming. And then your predictions, you can take credit for your predictions. How about that?
Hopefully, yeah. You can have me back even if I'm wrong. So,
All right. Thanks so much. Continue to enjoy the holidays, and we'll talk to you again. We'll be right
okay.
back on Politics and Perspective. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. At the end of the day, government causes unaffordability when it intervenes in the market and when it prints money to pay for more government spending. So I understand frustration as it relates to unaffordability. My mortgage went way up under Biden, and I'm still paying for it. And it pisses me off because I would like to spend it putting money away for my son's education. And I'm sure it angers you as well. But the answer to the affordability crisis, as Tomas mentioned, is never more spending. It is spending that got us into this problem, and it is the reduction of spending. Oh, by the way, like they're doing in Sweden, that's going to help us out. Let's go to the political roundup. So, Miami and Georgia, the results of those elections spelled Republicans defeating themselves. So, let's talk about this. You saw the Miami election where the Democrats took over Miami for the first time in 30 years. Well, you say to yourself, it's a big city, there's more Democrats there, but Republicans did have a 30-year hold on it. Georgia, conservative leaning district, the Democrat won. Now, why does this concern me more than New Jersey, Virginia, and Tennessee? Well, New Jersey, Virginia, those were Democrat states. Mondami, New York City, Democrat. Okay, so they won. Off year election, makes sense. California, Prop 50, makes sense. Tennessee, Republican state, Republican district, they won, not quite as much as everyone would have liked. Pollster Robert Cauley says the message isn't getting through clearly because he only won by that narrow margin. But Georgia and Miami. So let's take a look at what happened in Miami. If we can bring up this graphic again, first time in 30 years. So is that the story? Or let's look at the real story. In the city of Miami, there's 174,000 and change registered voters. Ballots cast, 37%, 37,000, sorry. Voter turnout, 21%. 21%. So why did the Republicans lose this? Because the Republicans didn't vote in that election. Pure and simple. They sat at home. Now, why did they sit at home? We'll talk about that in a minute. Georgia, same thing. The Democrat defeated the Republican, flipping a Georgia State House seat, flipping it with 50.85% of the vote, and the Republican got 49.15. But also, there was a low turnout. In fact, November 5th, Prop 50 in California, very low Republican turnout, even though there was a large turnout among Democrats. Democrats have won something like 200 something out of the 240 seats that have been up since November. They're crowing about that. Now, look, the economy is transitioning. We talked about that with Tomas. 2026 is going to be a better economic year. I am confident in that. But nevertheless, it is now a pandemic among Republicans that they don't go out and vote. They don't have the energy of the Democrat. The Democrat comes out almost no matter what, doesn't care about the candidate, doesn't like Trump, will vote for anything anti-Trump, but they just want to win. The Republicans aren't enthused by Congress as much as they are by Trump, yet, and they criticize their candidates for not being pure enough. Democrats don't rarely criticize their candidates when it comes to election day and stay at home because they wasn't pure enough. That's not the Democrat Party today. But the Republicans will not go out and vote in these elections. And that is a warning sign for 2026. Does that mean I think they're going to lose the House? No, I think honestly the redistricting is going to save them. I think they have a good chance of losing the House without redistricting, but I think it's going to save them. But in the fight for America going forward, if Republicans think they can show up like they did in Miami and Georgia, then there will be no saving of America. And if you're sitting at home and you decide you don't have to vote or tell your friends to vote or drive together, that's not going to cut it. Because if we lose the state houses and the Congress, that's a problem. And so Republicans defeating Republicans is a pretty serious issue. The Democrats didn't win the Miami seat. The Republicans gave it away. The Democrats didn't win the Georgia seat. The Republicans gave it away sitting at home. And a decision has to be made. Are the Republicans going to change their minds and decide that they have to fight for America? Or are they going to cede ground to Mondami, Newsom, AOC, socialist mayor in Portland who's never had a job, on and on? Jasmine Crockett in Texas. That's the lesson of Miami. Will Republicans defeat themselves? All right, so listen, this is my book. And for those who want a book that gives them answers to so that they can have discussions, whether it's on the economy, the religious founding of America, the work founding of America, the fact that America is exceptional, why capitalism is the father of democracy, why dissent and the First Amendment are the mother of true democracies, this book is your book. It's not very thick. Doesn't take that long to read. It's got good reviews, especially from me. So while you're still time, you can get this for Christmas for someone, or my other book, The Divided Era. And please join me on Substack. I'm Tom Del Beccaro, and we'll see you next week on Politics in Perspective.